All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you could start making your way to your seats, grab your coffee, grab some breakfast. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nicholas Martinez. I am the co-founder of Transform Education Now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here at an 8 a.m. start time. It's a packed room, so that we are deeply appreciative of that. Want to quickly say thank you to the University of Colorado at Denver, our panelists. Today we are going to have a conversation about Denver. This is not the start, nor is this the end of that conversation, but it is a chance for us to take a look at some data, to learn something new, and to continue the conversation about what we need to do to be able to serve all kids. We are excited to have a diverse set of community. We are excited to have all of our friends, our allies. We are excited to have folks here who care deeply about our children. We hope that today is a robust conversation, and we hope that today is, like I said, the continuation of that conversation where we continue to move forward, working for a better education system for all children. So thank you very much, and I will turn it over to
I'll take it. Thanks. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. To Nick's point, it says something. It says something that this room, this many people, this diverse a crowd shows up at 8 o'clock in the morning for a conversation like this, and we are indeed appreciative. My name is Jason Galden. I'm with an organization called America Succeeds. We're actually a national outgrowth of a very successful organization that began right here in Denver, Colorado, called Colorado Succeeds, and that's an effort to engage business leaders in education as well, because guess what? Business leaders are parents too. We all care about the well-being of our kids, and we know that education is central to their life outcomes. And so just a quick highlight of today's agenda. We are going to hear a presentation by Dr. Macke Raymond, and then we will have a bit of a panel discussion, and we will leave time to have some engagement and some questions, not speeches or dissertations, but some questions from the audience so that we can have the panelists respond. And so we're looking forward to that, so buckle up, let's go. My first order of business is to introduce Dr. Raymond, or actually she gives us all permission to call her Macke. She serves as the founder and director of the Center for Research on Education Outcomes, CREDO, that's based at Stanford University. Her team conducts rigorous research, evaluation, analysis, and tries to understand best practices and outcomes for K-12 students in the public schools here in the US. Frankly, I love their motto, and that's simply that we let the data speak. She's a regularly featured in the media. She was a Bahara Aspen Education Fellow, and recently she took a very close look at what's happening here in Denver. School performance, student outcomes, her findings are fascinating. She's here to have that candid conversation with us today, so why don't you help me in welcoming Macke. Little mood music.
Get the blood rolling this morning. Thank you for that. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. We are incredibly grateful for the opportunity to study school performance around the country, and we couldn't do that without many folks and organizations supporting us. Specifically, the Colorado Department of Education, with whom we have a data sharing agreement, the State Board of Education, who has approved us to access and use data for studies like this. Do I need to be closer to the mic?
Closer.
I need an extra arm.
Okay, can you stand to the side?
I can stand to the side. No.
Yeah, okay.
I'll just speak louder. How's
Yeah,
that?
project as much as you can. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I also wanted to thank the collaborators at Root Ed and Denver Public Schools. They've helped us to make sure that we have the right assignments of schools to the right categories, and they've been very supportive to us in helping us understand some of the words on the ground. And my colleagues at Stanford who have done the work, Chungping Han and Justin Liu, both of whom wish they could be here today to hear all of the things you have to say. So I'm glad that we're streaming this. I hope to be able to take some of that back to them. I look forward to your comments. Let me tell you a little bit about the City Schools Project. Denver's study is embedded in a larger initiative that we're doing with 10 cities across the United States. And we're hoping to do the same methodology in each of the cities, and we want to do this for a couple of different reasons. We're hoping over time that we take repeated snapshots of school performance in each of the cities that we study, but we also, and so we'll have repeated measures of performance and see trends. Excellent. Is that better? Can people hear me better now? Thank you. But the other thing is that we are also hoping that there's an encouraging comparison across the cities, particularly at the student subgroup level, to see how other cities are performing. And so the report that I'm bringing you today looks at performance in Denver, but it's also a service that we're doing to the other cities in our collaboration. When we say performance, we're actually looking at how much progress the typical student makes in 1 year's time. And in order to do that, in this particular study, we are using the average performance of students across the state as the benchmark. So looking at the state average, how do schools in Denver perform in terms of how far they bring their students in a year's time? And we've used 4 years of data to create 3 different periods of progress, and we're going to be reporting on those 3 years. In addition to that, we've dived a little deeper to find out how schools in various sectors of the public education world in Denver are doing. We've studied innovation schools, charter schools, and traditional district public schools, and those data are also compared to the state average. And then we do the student subgroups within the city, taken in the aggregate, so that we can tell which student groups are moving more quickly than other student groups. The deeper dive that I'm going to share with you about the student subgroups are actually only for the last growth period. I can tell you the patterns are consistent across the earlier periods, but I didn't want to throw too much data at you all at once. While I think that there's a lot of good things about this study, there's a few things that this study can't tell us, and I wanted to be very clear about that before I start sharing our results. We can show you the status of Denver at particular points in time, and we can tell you how that's changed over time. So what we're doing is looking at results. What we're not doing, what this methodology is unable to do, is tell you why we're getting the results that we do. We do not get under the hood, as we call it, to talk about particular differences across schools in curricular or instructional approaches, or staffing differences, or length of the school year, or length of the school day. Those are things that are outside the scope of our study. Moreover, I think that's a story that each of you, affiliated with your own schools, that's your story to tell as you dive into these findings. So looking forward to hearing from you on that. All right, so with all of that as background, let's hit it. What you are looking at here are the results for each of the 3 growth periods, all schools, all students in Denver. And I want to share with you what we have done in terms of the layout of this chart. You can see over here, this is the super technical statistical stuff. These are called effect sizes, and these are measures of standard deviations of progress. How many people wake up every morning thinking in standard deviation units? Please raise your hand. Yeah, it's a lonely club. And because of that, we have transformed the super technical, wonky effect sizes into what we consider days of learning. So if you think about a typical school year of being 180 days, the average student in Colorado from 1 year to the next makes 180 days of progress. And what we've done then is to take each of these measures of performance and translated them into how many either additional or fewer days of learning does that effect represent for the typical students. So let me break that down for you. A tenth of a standard deviation is 59 days of learning, right? So if you're positive 0.1, that means you've got students in the 14-15 school year had about 59 additional days of learning in a school year in reading in Denver across all students, all groups. Does that make sense? All right, so the days of learning are the ones that you see on the right-hand side. And I'm not going to do all the translations of effect sizes and days of learning through all of the rest of the presentation. I think if I've given you this anchor, you can kind of see more is more and less is less. And that's where we are. So the good news is in Denver that progress of students in Denver beats the state in all 3 growth periods and in both subjects. I can tell you across the other 9 communities in our cohort that Denver ranks #1 in aggregate annual progress of students in both subjects in all the years of our study. So I think that that's worth a moment to reflect upon. Yay, yay. All right. Well, so let's start to break that down. I'm going to take reading, that's the blue line. And what you see here is in each of those 3 periods of study, we are now presenting results by sector: charter, innovation, and traditional public schools that are not innovation schools. And the news is positive in all 3 groups, and they stay positive over the entire period. This is wonderful. I can also tell you that this is #1 ranking for charter and innovation schools in all subjects across the period, and it's strongest in 1 or 2 position for traditional public schools in Denver. So the pattern of performance here is consistent. It's equivalent across the sectors. It's an incredibly important advantage for students in Denver, no matter what schools they go to, compared to the progress in the rest of the state. And when I bring you that national perspective and you find out how much farther ahead of some of the other cities we've looked at, just to give you a small comparison, in the overall effect size in the most recent school year, the worst city, and I'm not going to name any cities, has a -1.3, which is about 120 days, fewer days of learning in a school year compared to the 180-day average. So your difference compared to that is more than a year's worth of difference in progress. And that is astounding. So part of the conversation I hope you have is, what is the ecosystem here that is supporting this kind of consistency? And how can we leverage that to do even better in the future? The news in math is very similar. I do want to point out that both traditional public schools and charter schools have had a downward trend in their performance. It's still positive, but I do want to point out that the performance has dropped a bit. And we certainly hope the next time we do this study that we're going to see something more on the upside again. Okay. This slide is intended only to show you what the distribution of schools looks like. Each one of these dots is the school-specific average performance in the most recent growth period. And so the red dot is the average that you just saw on the prior slide. And the blue dots are all the individual schools distributed around that average. And I want to point out to you that the distribution in each of these sectors is mostly clustered with a few really significant outliers. And the outliers on the right-hand side are outliers that are much more positive in the amount of growth that they help their students achieve in a year's time. And the outliers on the left side, well, I think you know what that means. I am really intrigued that the dots themselves are not that different across, the red dots themselves are not that different, and the distributions are substantially different. So there's a point for conversation and planning and thinking about how your schools work together to improve outcomes for kids. The same thing happens in math, yet the distributions are wider in math than they are in reading. And what that means is you've got a bigger spread across your schools in how they address math instruction for their students, how their students are performing. And so again, this is shared for your information and for a better understanding of what the real story is here in Denver. And it's a point for conversation for later. So now I'm going to start talking about some of the student subgroups, because as we all know, the best outcome is that every student every year is in a great school. And that, I think, is the goal that we all share. It doesn't matter if I sit in California and you sit in Colorado. That's the dream, that's the goal, that's what we are all working for. And the work that we do at CREDO is merely trying to put the data on the table to help you folks have deeper conversations about what's needed in order to improve outcomes for all kids. So what you're looking at here are all kids, all black students in Denver across all three sectors. And what you can see is they're making better progress than the state average black student would make. And those advantages are pretty substantial. It's 24 days in math, and it's about 30 days of additional learning per year in reading. Those are important results, and we just don't see that across the country. This is not something that we would normally expect to see. So this is a great outcome. We're very pleased to be able to report that. Let's break that down by sector. And here, you're looking at the average growth of black students compared to the average black student in the state for each of the three sectors that we're looking at. And where you've got statistical stars right above the bar, that means it's statistically significantly different from the state average. And where you've got this little greeny thing, that little thing right there, which could be bigger, I'm sorry for you in the back, I apologize. It means also that compared to the growth that we see in traditional public schools for black students, the other sectors would be statistically significantly positive or negative. Green star means it's statistically more than TPS and than traditional district schools. A red star means it's less. There are no red stars in any of these slides. So that's helpful. Let's do the same thing for Hispanics. Oh, I also want to just mention to you in the comparison, again, overall black students' performance for all students in Denver is first in the rankings, and also for the traditional public school district students who are black. It's the #1 ranking across the country in all the cities that we study. We're very pleased about that for Denver, because they've obviously been putting a lot of work into this. Okay, hold your applause, because you're going to really want it for this one. This one is really good. All right. So what we're looking at here is all Hispanic students across the city, regardless of where they go to school. And you can see here that it's about the same amount of progress as for black students, about 24 extra days of learning in math, but it's a substantially higher degree of progress. And it turns out it's 52 or 53 extra days of learning and reading for Hispanic students across the city on average. This is so incredibly larger than we see in any other community around the country at the average. But hold on, there's more. Sound like an infomercial. Here you see the breakout by individual sector, and both traditional public school students who are Hispanic and charter school students who are Hispanic are doing better than Hispanic students on average across the state in both subjects. That's phenomenal. And I can tell you that in all of these three groups, #1 across all 10 cities. So the work with Hispanic students is such a strong exemplar, and the delta of how well Denver is doing compared to the worst city is even larger than I shared with you before. It's more than a school year. So the progress here is so important to not only acknowledge and appreciate, but also let's think about how we can help others understand what's going on here so that they can emulate it. All right, let's move to poverty. Oops, sorry. Poverty, same thing. Looks a lot like Hispanic students, exactly the same degrees of improvement. And the same kind of results when we look at it by sector. Super positive in all of these areas. The district school performance is top ranked nationally and in both subjects, and charters are ranked in the number one position for reading. There's some incredible work going on here. And again, the delta is more, best to worst across the entire country is more than a whole school year of progress difference between the best and the worst. English language learners, a little bit of a fall off in math. It's not statistically significant, and the same degree of impact in English language learning for learners for reading. And here's the only place where we actually see a difference in performance by sector. We are seeing very positive and significant work in math for charter school students and district school students who are ELL students, and not significant in the rest of the areas. Denver innovation, not statistically significant from the state average, but still positive in terms of the national comparison with other cities. And not significant math progress for ELL students in charter schools. So a little bit of an area where there might be some focus and discussion for improvement. And finally, special education students are making more progress in Denver than they are state as a whole. And these differences are pretty significant. The important news here is that innovation schools and charter schools are beating the state significantly in reading, and that charter school reading score is also significantly better than the performance of special education students in the district. The rest of it is not a particularly strong story for special education students in mathematics. So I don't know if you guys got bored with all of this positive news. I certainly hope that that's not the case.
Did you break this down by students of color, black and brown students?
Yes, ma'am, we did that before you arrived. I'd be happy to do that with you afterwards if you'd like.
Okay.
So I do think in summary that there's a tremendous amount that Denver has to celebrate. The three growth periods that you're seeing rest on hard work that came before that in earlier years. You can see a positive trend starting at the beginning of 2010. It continues out through the 16-17 school year. I think there's tremendous reason to be proud of the work that's done here. I think there are incredible lessons that can be harvested here, not only to help each other be good and be better, but also to help other communities around the country understand what you do that they obviously don't do in order to improve their results. But lest I leave you just in a fog of euphoria, let me just say that I think that there's still some things that we want to be cognizant about. I showed you that there's wide variation in the amount of progress across schools. What I didn't show you is when you break that down by individual student subgroups, students of color, students in poverty, special education students, those differences are huge. And they're huge and important. And so even within the community, there is opportunity to learn from the best and to adopt strategies that will help improve outcomes for kids. I hope the next time I'm standing in front of you that I can report in that these areas are attended to and are being addressed, and that I can stand with you again and share celebratory news. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to we're going to have questions at the end. We're going to have a little panel, and then we're having questions. Okay, is that right?
Yeah,
That's
thank you.
it. All right.
Round of applause. Thank you again so very much, Macke. We really appreciate the work that you do. We love the fact that this is independent analysis and data, and that it gives us a universal starting point for the conversation. We're going to dive into that now. The headline here for me is that each type of school for the population of students that we serve is making positive progress. That is the district-run schools, the charter schools, the innovation schools, and I think that's to be celebrated. We also take Macke's other point is that, yes, of course, there's still yet much more work to do. And so let's jump into that with a panel discussion, and my job is to introduce the other panelists, but I don't think any of them need much introduction, and in fact, I'll let them introduce themselves. We have Susana Cordova, the superintendent. We have Vernon, who's with a wonderful grassroots organization called Faith Bridge, and Charles Dukes with the city. I'll let each of them speak loudly and introduce themselves, and since we're here talking about data, give me your name, what you do, and one data point that you like to talk about when it comes to Denver, and maybe education and maybe something else, but what's kind of one of the things that comes up in conversations or something you like bragging about or a challenge you like addressing in terms of data. So Susana, we'll start with you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Susana Cordova, superintendent in Denver. This data question is certainly something that I'm thinking about. I'll do one of the easiest data points for me personally. This is going to be my 30th year in the Denver Public Schools, and I've been really proud to be a classroom teacher, principal, member of the central office support teams, and really excited about this 31st year.
That's a good data point. Thank you.
Vernon Jones with Faith Bridge. My data point is I am a father of 5 kids. 3 are currently in the public schools, and I'll just so Vernon Jones with Faith Bridge. My data point is I'm a father of 5 kids. 3 are in Denver Public Schools. 2 are in college, Daniels Fund scholars, and so that's a great data point for me. And lastly, my mother is a 30-year black teacher in Denver Public Schools, and I just thank God for her. She's the same as you, 31st year. So.
So good morning, I'm Charles Dukes. I'm with the Office of Children's Affairs in the City and County of Denver. And I've been fortunate to work in both Aurora and Denver Public Schools as a district administrator. So I've been able to see 2 of our largest urban school districts and how we approach the challenge with graduation rates, and as well as proficiency and helping our students move on to ultimately have a job and a career in the future. How's that? As far as my data point, the first thing that comes to my mind this morning is my daughter walked to school for the first time, and so she's 1 for 1. She almost got lost, but fortunately, she has FaceTime, so I was trying to help her. So that's my data point today.
Fantastic. Let's just jump into the conversation, and Macke, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. Was there anything that particularly jumped out as surprising or unusual or unexpected in this data that you want to call our attention to?
I think the thing that struck me the strongest in reviewing these data were that you could see in the data the blood, sweat, and tears of years and years of effort to improve outcomes for kids. And I actually don't see that when I look at other places. I don't get to stand up in rooms like this often and say, good on you. I usually have to say, what are you doing? And so it was, I can't tell you how you've done what you've done or what specific things did work and what specific things didn't work, but the data are so consistent that they have to tell the story of protracted effort. So. Yep. Good on you.
I tell you what, thank you, and we understand that you can tell us the what, you can't tell us the why, but I know who's someone who might be able to. Susana, what's underneath this data? Why? How? is this kind of progress being made across school type?
Sure. So thank you. And even for those of us who are working in the field, it's always really hard to exactly pinpoint the why we get the results that we get. I can tell you a few things that I think have really contributed to the improvements that we've seen, both sustained improvements and a focus on continuous improvement over time. I think it's been really helpful to have the opportunity for schools to develop a very specific identity, to build the buy-in of a strong school team around that identity. Over this period of time, we were really pushing the concept of strong school leadership and distributed leadership, that teachers are really essential in the improvement of what is going on. I think the fact that you see the kind of improvement that we see, variations obviously, but across all sectors, really speaks to the concept that having the kind of schools that we have in our district really has encouraged improvement. I would say initially a lot of that came through competition. I think Mackie's really put out an important charge to us that it can't only be through competition. We really are going to have to shift into being a much more collaborative space so we can learn from the very best practices. I think if we dug deeper in, and I think I heard you say this, there's also variation within the results. And so as we look at schools within types, there are people who are doing far better that we need to learn from. And I think those lessons can be learned across all of those different, charter, innovation zone, and our district managed schools. So I would say that those are a few of the things.
So critical, as everyone knows, so critical is community engagement, and there is a lot of forms and avenues of community engagement. One in particular is the newly galvanized black pastors in the area, and Vernon Jones is with Faith Bridge. I want to know kind of what message you take from this data that you want to take back to the faith community, and what messages in the faith community that needs to come out to the superintendent and to the community.
So it's all pastors, not just black pastors, so we love all of you.
Point taken.
Thank you. Please don't limit my recruiting. So I think the data says, but I think I concur with some of what Susana said. I think what I know, having worked in a traditional school that became an innovation school, and then having been at a charter myself for 8 years, I know that one of the things that has helped us get to where we are, and what we will be pushing as a faith community, is just this thing called freedom, right? That we believe that where communities are free to self-determine, you get better results. Where we are less top-down controlled, when we are less, there are top-down dictates that come into community, we believe that those schools do better. And we think that if you dig deeper into the data, you will find the innovation schools, the charter schools, even the traditional neighborhood schools that are doing better, they have to deal with less bureaucracy. They have to deal with less of the dictates from central office. And central office has gotten better. I remember we were one of the first innovation schools, and one of the struggles that we had to deal with was the district, the rules on paper said we could be innovative, but the district was not ready to be innovative, right? The district was still master, right? And still was controlling to some degree what we could and couldn't do. I think the district has become more complementary to the things that have been put on paper. So the more that the district allows communities to be free, allows schools to be free, school leaders, parents, teachers, to do what we know best for our students, I think we see those results go through the roof. And I think, to Mackie's point, some of those gaps that are not in the report, I mean, even if you were listening, you heard some huge gaps. You see here, black students, 24 days of growth, and then you hear other folks, 52 plus days of growth. So even in the growth, there are gaps, right? So we have to have the freedom to deal with those gaps based on what we know on the ground to be the best things for our students. So that's the message we're taking back, is freedom, freedom, freedom. Get out the way, get out the way, get out the way. Let us do what we know is best for our kids.
Charles, it's on you. How do you look at this from a city perspective, and what does all of this mean? What are your observations here?
Yeah, one thing I want to just echo, I enjoy this conversation about Denver and how, even though, we've seen all schools in this data show increase and show improvement, which is something I hear often when I go to other cities or we hear other mayors talk about what they wish they had in their city. And so what we do know is what Denver has done over the last 10 years has shown improvement, which is something to be excited about. But then also the data shows there's a conflict, and I've been fortunate to really be in a lot of community discussions and hear some of the conflict around, what does this mean for all students? And so I'm excited about this conversation here as we open it up to the group to listen and hear some questions. So what I take back is, on one hand, we're doing some good things as a city, as a school district that's a model for other national cities. But then on the other hand, I do understand and respect there is a conflict about how do we do this for all students. And when I say all, it's 100% of the students in the city and the youth and in Denver public schools.
Jason, just for framing purposes, I think this has been 19 years of work, right? So Macke talked about the ecosystem. This has not just been yesterday that we started this. I think you have to look back. If I'm a big history guy, probably should have been a history teacher. But October 3rd, 1858 is when the first DPS, not DPS, but the first school was started, right? And so then DPS is introduced in 1903, right? Charters are not introduced. Freedom, what I call freedom, was not introduced to a broken ecosystem till about 2000, right? So from 2000 to now, we've been chipping away at an ecosystem that was failing us. Okay, so that's what folks need to understand. The ecosystem didn't just start failing us, it has been failing us. And so for 19 years, there have been teachers and principals and community advocates who have been grinding away at a system that was not designed for our success in 1858. So it took us that long to get to 2000 to begin to say, hey, let's do something different. Let's no longer accept that we have to be educated this way. So it's been a 19-year journey to get to where we are.
I want to pick up on that point about the longevity of this effort, and Macke, you're in that interesting position. Sometimes people love you, sometimes people hate you, but you really know you're doing something right when both sides hate you. No, but in over time, your data at times have looked at outcomes, and charters were not performing as well as they wanted to claim. And now you have data that suggests they are outpacing some gains. And so my question to you is, some people have criticized this particular piece of work as biased towards charter, even though in the past, your data, your very same independent research has shown otherwise. What do you say to that?
You're absolutely right that we are loved and hated in equal measure depending on our latest findings. And it's always interesting to see which friends jump across the line with new reports. Here's what I have to say. Your comparison basis really matters in terms of the findings that we bring forward. And so when we're comparing charter schools in a specific charter school study, we're comparing them to the performance in the local district students that look exactly like them. So it's a twin study. And what we often find across the country is that the twins in district schools are actually making more progress. That's not all schools in the district. These are just the specific kids that look like charter school kids. So you gotta be a little bit careful about what the comparison is. Where we find that charter schools are doing less well, we think we have the obligation, our mission is we have an obligation to put the data out there and to challenge people to take a look at what the data reveal. And we've been doing this for 15 years, and I can tell you that every time we produce reports that show that schools are not doing well, we go to purgatory for about 6 months in whatever community that was. That we are absolutely hated until the conversation starts. And once the conversation starts and there's that reflection that says, the data are the data, what do we have to do? Then we come out of purgatory or come out of Siberia and can continue on moving forward with the work that we do. What I see in the work that we're doing now is that there are very few communities that can sustain the focus on improvement. So when I look at other communities, I see, regardless of whether we're talking district or charter schools, I see all kinds of spikes in performance, right? It'll be good for a couple of years, and then it goes down. And it'll be good for a couple of years in a different sector, and then it falls off. The real amazing finding here is the consistency. The fact that you build on prior success to get to new success. And I literally don't know what it takes to do that, but you gotta bottle that. You'll make $1 million. I promise you will. But more importantly, there are important lessons about how you sustain. And in this work that we're all engaged in, being able to sustain is one of the biggest challenges that we as individuals have, right? Because the work is hard, the days are long, the years are long, the challenges are huge. And the fact that you can figure a way to stay the course is one of the exceptional things that we see in this work, so.
Susana, it
Jason,
looks
if
like
I
you
could-
want to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is an element to the Denver community that has contributed to the need to continuously get better. And frankly, I think it's really important, like, we're a democracy. I think it's really important that the diversity of perspectives have a place in considering the improvements in our schools. And I think that's really true regardless of where you sit on the spectrum of your thoughts about the appropriate approach to public schooling. And so I think it was very important that, at the point in time when charter schools were introduced, that frankly, they were introduced with the concept of our kids deserve more and can do better. And we can, as a community, come together around what that looks like. And I think it's equally true when people are coming together to say, we are the members of this community and we want to be able to be engaged in, as Vernon says, the self-determination of what our school is going to look like going forward, that we don't want this to be imposed upon us. And there are elements across the diversity of perspectives that have contributed to how we have been able to get better. I think any time we're ready to sit back and say, like, we got it. Macke said we're top out of 10. Well, like, who cares if we're top out of 10 if the bottom out of 10 is making 120 days less growth than 180 days? I mean, who cares if we're way better than that? We know that we can do significantly more for our kids. And the reason we know it is because there are places that are doing it. We are just not doing it at scale. And the work that we have to figure out is how we learn from the very best. I very strongly believe we need to put labels aside, and we need to be able to say, who is doing the best work? How can we learn from that? How can we apply it into different contexts? Because context really matters. But how do we set aside sort of our arrogance? And like, as a member of the district, there have been times when we've been incredibly arrogant about what we're doing. We need to be able to set that aside and have a learning agenda. And that really is what our kids deserve.
Charles, what are we not doing in terms of city interaction and collaboration along with the district? Any opportunities you see to improve that relationship and collaboration?
Yeah. So as far as collaboration, again, this is another model that other cities value in terms of how Susana works with our mayor and meets with him often. And previously, Tom meet with our mayor to talk through some big issues and challenges across the city. And so as far as more opportunities for the city and the district to work together, there's some things that should come to light. One is how do we continue to recruit and retain teachers of color? I mean, that's something that, as we think about our work moving forward, this is a need across the city, whether it's traditional or charter or innovation. And that's a national issue as well. But I think Denver is poised to be in another model for across the nation. The other piece is thinking about equitable practices. Is as we work with Susana and the district, and as the city embarks in their equitable practices, it's around how do we hire and how do we look at our hiring practices, and how do we work with Susana and her team to think about their hiring practices that mirrors what the city's doing, as well as we reach out and we think about equitable practices. And the last part of that is, how do we take a look at funding? How do we continue to fund organizations and support organizations with the district that are really embodying these equitable practices across the city. And I know that's not specifically in the district, but that's a partnership as we think about community involvement. There's a number of great nonprofits that are helping be a part of this charge. And so those are a couple things that come to mind.
So we've got the national level perspective, we've got the city level perspective, we've got the district level perspective. Vernon, I want to hear from you. How do you activate this data at the school level?
Yeah, it's not at an 8 o'clock in the morning meeting.
It is for kindergarten parents.
7:30.
Yeah.
7:30, right?
And I think that's real. I mean, I think it's real. We got to know our communities. We've got to get this data in the hands of community at in a place that works for community. What's the best time, date, location? That's what we have to do. We have to know our communities and then present the data to them in a comfortable space that works for them. And I think community's already activated too. I mean, I can imagine how many emails and phone calls you get, text messages from us, and I can imagine we're already activated. I think there's also this, define that. What does activated mean to you, right? But I think we got to share the data at a time that's appropriate for community, in a place that's appropriate for community, and allow community to dialogue. And I think go deeper to Macke's point, there's a lot of stuff that it's not saying that community is saying, and let's validate that data is right, and so is what community's feeling, right? So don't use that data to silence the voice of community and everybody clap and say, we're doing great, and community's like 18% reading proficiency in the far Northeast.
Right.
How does that work, right?
Exactly.
So, and I don't think that's what we're saying at all. I don't think that's we're saying that's great, what Macke's report is saying, but we're also saying what Macke's saying is, there's still a lot of work to be done. So,
Susana, how do we press forward in this work?
Yeah,
What is your vision on this?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I would say I think it's so important to always work by believing in the very best of what we're capable of and what our students are capable of. And that is not to in any way try to mask or hide where we're not yet where we need to be. But the way we build, I believe, is by believing in the assets that our kids come with. And so this year, we're intensely focused as an organization on what it truly means to be asset-minded. And I think it's critical. And I'll just keep saying, there are places that are doing this work exceedingly well. Last year, we brought in schools that were beating the averages on SAT, so that we can just learn from them. Like, what is it that you're doing? How is it that you're thinking about preparing kids for the rigorous expectations of college entrance exams? And how is it that we can support more schools to do that? I believe deeply in schools coming together. Teachers do know, and you don't know what you don't know. And so it is really important that we create the space for people to learn from each other and to think through, like, how do you create scope and sequence tools that really emphasize what we want kids to know and be able to do? And how do we do that in a way that builds on the success that we have had without resting on that success?
So, different people have different perspectives on Denver's embrace of charter schools. Some people like that, some people don't, but the reality is Denver has taken a track, at least historically, to embrace all schools, no matter the type, if they can demonstrate that they best serve students. So the flip side of that coin is that Denver is largely recognized as one of the nation's best authorizers. That is to say that the process is rigorous, that not just anyone can walk up to the district with a charter and get it approved. And so, Macke, does that factor into the work? What is your perspective on how that might affect results?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I see in the information that we have at our disposal that the charter sector has improved here for two separate reasons. One, the schools that are opening up that are new come out of the gates stronger than the average charter school. In other words, every new school is helping to raise the average a little bit. There are a few exceptions, but the newer schools are stronger. One, it's because charter operators know what they're doing, and if they're opening up a second school, they're able to replicate success. The second part of that is authorizers are getting more particular about what they're looking for in the application process. The second thing that's happening, and it happens in Denver more than it happens, in Colorado more than it happens in other states, is that schools that are underperforming, when they come up for renewal, are finding the bar to renewal a lot higher than we see in other places. Now, that's not to say that there aren't still schools that are getting renewed that potentially could not, should not, maybe. But on average, the level of performance of underperforming schools that get renewed is a whole lot higher in Colorado and in Denver than it is in other places. So room for improvement, but authorizing matters a lot in sort of curating the quality of the sector.
Can I just add, I think it's really important to just name the exact same process that charter schools go through to open up is the same process that a new district school goes through, a new innovation school.
What about accountability though?
Yeah,
Because see, as a parent that has 4 children and 3 that are still in the DPS school system, I find that charters do not have the accountability that district public schools have. And that's in my finding. Like I said, I have a 20-year-old, and he went all the way through the system, and you all talked about historically, you've been working on it for 20 years. I want to see it, because when you're doing the work, it needs to be tangible.
Got it. I want Susana to address that, and Vernon, you've had experience across the board, charters, innovation, traditionals. I want both of you to address that very issue. Sure. What is the accountability measures? Is there a difference, and why?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to name that the biggest difference between district schools, innovation, or district managed schools and charter schools is the Denver Public Schools actually runs our district schools. And so we can, as the operator of schools, take steps pretty quickly when we see that there are concerns, particularly parent concerns. In the case with charter schools, that is the function of the charter, the principal, the charter board, to be able to do that. And we really try to make sure that they take that responsibility very, very seriously as well, to ensure that families are being served well. When we think about authorizing, when we think about renewal, it largely is based on how we see the performance of students. And generally, that historically has been largely an academic assessment. We do look at other factors. But I think we've heard really loud and clear from our community that the emphasis on academics has come at the expense of some of the other things that families really care about. We are today, in fact, kicking off a process to really think deeply about what do we want our accountability system to look like? How is it that we want to take into consideration the increasing voices around the environment in schools is more than just the academic outcomes? And this year, here's another data point. It's the first time in 2 decades I'm not going to be a DPS parent. So I just went through 20 years of school with my kids. And I know I really, really cared about the academic achievement of my kids and what the daily experience was like. I get that. And I think it is really important that we have a system that looks at both aspects. Hard to measure, but really important to our community, I know.
Vernon, jump in.
Yeah, no, I think that from an authorizer perspective, I'd agree with Susana. I think that as an authorizer, they definitely have to push the envelope a bit more. And this is from a guy who was with the charter for 8 years. You have to definitely push the envelope a little bit more when it comes to holding charters accountable for upholding the standards of service that the district provides, right? That you may have great academics, but the district also has a great value of parent engagement. We have a great value of, be responsive to parents, meet those things also, I think, have to be evaluated and held up to charters to say you can't just get great academic outcomes in our district and we call you a great school. There's a holistic approach, how we serve our communities, how we are a part of the ecosystem in a healthy way, how parents are not frustrated because they don't know how to navigate this communication structure. I remember what parents would call the DPS board, and the DPS board would say, that's not us, you gotta call this board. Then that parent would call that board, the board would say, no, not that person, you gotta go. So those are the kind of things I think the district can do better as an authorizer, is to help clarify those things so parents know how to navigate the very different schools that they go to. As what's the communication policy at the innovation school? How do I access the board at my charter school, right? How do I, at some schools now that have school leadership teams, how do I as a parent get connected with the school leadership team? I think we need to make sure that all of those things are clear across the board. So at no point is it frustrating for a parent and their child to go to a school that's not managed by the district. I think there should be some things across the board that are just great.
In addition to that, and while it's not a perfect system, I think something that bridges district-run schools, innovation, charters, is the universal enrollment function. So you, parents, are a big part of the accountability system, because you're deciding which school, and no longer limited or necessarily assigned to your specific school, you're going to choose each year where you want your students to go. Now, do you always
To some
get?
degree.
Yeah,
Not
well,
completely. It doesn't
right,
work completely,
exactly.
I can tell you.
Like I said, it
does
is
work
not. It is not
completely.
perfect. It is not
Let's
perfect.
get it right.
Let's jump into some audience questions. But I'll ask you to say your name and speak up
Okay,
and
I'm
ask a
Radhika
direct
Nath.
question.
Yes, I'm Radhika Nath. I have a couple of comments and questions. Ms. Macke, Dr. Macke, that presentation, maybe I missed the beginning, but usually I would like to see, that we are broken up into 5 districts. You'd like to see the distribution of how those kids are doing. This comparison to the state makes no sense to me, because you have 5 districts that you could have looked at and presented those comparisons. I'm hoping that the district will present the data to us and allow us to see those distributions, because it would be so interesting for us to actually dig into it a little bit deeper than to just have this bigger presentation of, you're right, it felt very
Okay.
boring to say, oh, this is great, there's variation. We'd love to be able to see those variations and see why those variations are occurring. because-
Okay, let's stop there and let them respond to that
Okay,
real quick.
all right.
Was there? I imagine you're talking about the regions within the district.
board regions.
Yes, there are 5 districts within District
4 board
1,
regions.
and that we've got different distribution of
Susana, you want to take that real
and
quick?
Sure.
Hispanic children.
Data
Hispanic-
and
We couldn't
everything.
even see how many there are. I would like to know how many SPED children the charter schools are taking care of versus other schools, and then say, this is the growth pattern, because I didn't see any of that descriptive
Okay,
presented. And clearly I walked in.
we're going to let them respond.
Sure. So thank you. I don't want to respond for this particular study.
Right.
For the Denver Public Schools, whenever we display results, we do try to make sure that we display the results using board region distributions. We've set Denver Plan goals by board region, and so we always look at that information. We didn't actually conduct this study, and my guess is what we would find if we looked at this information not just by the demographic breakdowns that we saw here, but by the demographic breakdowns and board regions, that we'd see wide variation. And I think I think Macke alluded to that even within the results, there is variation across. And I think that's really important and really troubling. We know that there are some parts of the city that are serving kids very, very, very well, and other areas that are struggling. It's something that we are very focused on, because we know it really makes a difference to our students.
But that data
We
is
change
released
our
regularly.
presentation.
Hold on, the data is released regularly, and it is accessible.
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Mac,
Not this
let's-
study. We didn't do
No, I
this
was gonna
study.
Right. Not this study, but she's talking about the academic performance disaggregated by student type.
Yeah.
Regionally, it is available,
That's
it is
right.
accessible.
That's
I will be writing in later, please do provide us
Great.
data.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Macke, I'm going to let you, do you have any response to that?
The only reason we didn't do it is because it's already been done. Those data are available, and they're publicly available, and they are robust. And so we didn't feel like it was necessary for us to redo that in order to set the context for the study that we did.
Do you know when that study was done, and where's the report?
So every year when we report on our academic results from state assessments, we do publish that information by board region. And so we can connect afterward. I'd be more than happy to share that with you.
And we're going to try to get as many questions in as we can.
Stand up for a while.
I'm coming right back to you, Brendan. Right here.
Hi, my name is Yamile. I work for Denver Public Schools, and I'm just curious on the day. Thank you, Dr. Macke. And thank you for hosting this because it was really awesome to get this email. I wanted to be here for the data. I'm curious about. I appreciated the differences between all of the different subgroups, but I'm curious about how students who are not impacted either by race or socioeconomic, how they compare in DPS. So do you know, I know that wasn't part of the work today, but I'm curious to know what their standard deviation number would be. So a white student
I know
in
that we have
DPS
done that.
versus, yeah.
We've done that work, and I'm assuming you're asking about white students?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
That's curious, thank you.
On our website, we have the
Oh, that's
full
great,
set
thank
of
you.
data on this report. What I showed you today is a subset of what we've done.
Okay.
And you can get the impacts for white students across the community as a whole and also within the subsets. And we also break it out by gender and by a few other things that I didn't bring today because we just didn't have time.
Thank you very much.
Let's get to Brendan. What's your question?
Well, it's more of a comment. I appreciate you coming, appreciate you sharing the data, appreciate the panel and all your comments and all the input. But one thing that stood out to me is what you said, Susana, about when we want to look at more than just academic achievement and Vernon, the holistic approach to education, right? When we talk about anything, any kind of data with black students, we have to talk about the criminalization of our black students, right? And how often they are taken out of the classroom setting for suspensions, how often they're handcuffed. That's a very personal one for me. And we have to look at all of that and how that plays a factor into this data as well. Another thing I want to talk about is the number of students that we have in a pathway system that are black and Latino, where an expectation on the SPF is lower than the normal schools inside of the district. So the data that we're looking at and the growth that we're celebrating for black and Latino students, the bar has been lowered for a lot of them in pathway students. So while we're celebrating and clapping, I don't think we should be doing that. I don't think we should be doing any of that, celebrating for this data points for black and Latino students because of what I just said. We got a number of students in this pathway system, and the expectation for them has been lowered. Look at the SPF. And we can't sit back and celebrate when the bar has been lowered for our children. We can't celebrate this data.
You're right. Point taken, valid. And there may or may not be any cause for celebration, but certainly we want to build on what's going right so we are directionally correct. Macke, I'm going to let you respond.
So it's important to make the distinction between an absolute standard of performance, which is what the pathway system is based on, which is a threshold of meeting expectations, and the progress from year to year that this study is based on.
And the comparison is from black student to black student, though.
That's correct.
We want the comparison from black student to the highest achieving students in the district, and why there's such a disparity between the two.
Right.
Because we are the third highest in the nation for opportunity and access gap.
And achievement gap for black and Latino.
There's absolutely no question that there's lots and lots of room to be done, and if the next time I come to you, this is something that you want to make sure we include in the analysis, we would be happy.
My point being, my overall point though is when we're talking about any data that has to be about black students or Latino students, then I look around the room and I look who's telling the story and who's presenting the narrative. Where is the black representation when we talk about our community? And like Vernon said, we have to create a time and a place and a space that's suitable for community to be a part of this conversation.
That's right.
Because I don't see the representation. I look I look around this room, I know with the 70s or 67% Latino in the district, 13% black. That's over 80%. When I'm looking around this room, we don't represent 80% of the people in this room.
Yeah,
So
and
there's
to
a
be
problem.
clear, this, as Nick said at the beginning, this is not the beginning and this is not the end of this conversation. And oh, by the way, we should, in various ways, be tailoring this conversation for our respective communities and frankly, taking it to them. I want to get to as many questions as possible.
To answer to Brandon's point too, I also think that when we go back to original intent, Susana brought this up, original intent of charters were to be incubators of best practices to help us learn what we could be doing better in the system that was failing black and brown and poor students. That was the intent of charters. You heard what she said. It turned into, instead of incubators to help move the needle, it became a delivery system, right? Instead of an incubator, it became the delivery system that introduced competition into the system versus collaboration. What I appreciate about what Susana's doing with her leadership is saying, wait a second, this competition is still leaving black and brown kids behind. So we have to move from competition to collaboration to say best practices. That's why this data, to me, I agree with you. You know, we talk, there's a lot lacking. Our story's not necessarily woven through it. Doesn't even talk about the impacts of trauma and where are they growing from. When you take that data, where those kids coming in already behind grade level and now they're, you know, so all of that's in there. But I think the point is we have to be able to shift how the ecosystem works. We don't want to compete. That's not us. We want to collaborate so that the best things are happening for our students. And that's why, you know, where's Karen Mortimer? Karen Mortimer walked in, and we've been doing this work forever in the community. And she celebrated because she said, man, the district's not scared of you anymore. You're sitting on a panel with Susana, right? I said, Susana's not scared of me. You know, hallelujah, it's a shift, right? So some of us we acknowledge, those of us who've been doing it, we acknowledge a shift, and I think we have to get along, and by get along, we have to get in with the shift and get to where you want us to be, where we want to be, to say, let's get the reality that our families have been hungry for generations, and I think now's the time to do that.
All right, we're going here and then here. Tell us who you are and ask a direct question.
Absolutely. I'm Laura. I am an analyst with DPS who worked heavily on the culturally responsive education efforts. Reverend, I appreciated your, is it Reverend or Pastor?
Vernon's good.
In regards on schools having the freedom to make the best choices for their students, do you have thoughts on how you balance that desire for freedom with requirements for some potentially uncomfortable things, such as implicit bias training and dealing with racism when the school wants to say, that's too messy, I don't want to deal with that. How do you balance those tensions between offering school freedom to do the best they think they need to do for their students, with also saying, but you really need to address these things even if you don't want to?
Great question.
You want my measured response or? So if someone said that to me, you are not a leader in my district. Okay, let's just be straight up. We are trying to get to a different space and a different place. And if you are telling me that you don't want to deal with implicit bias, then you don't get it. Right? Okay? And so if we're trying to get somewhere as a district, we have to stop coddling people. I said this at another event for DSSG. I have a Kleenex box for white fragility. Okay? Real talk. Okay? In the car right now. I'll go get it for you. Okay? Real talk is we got to stop saying it's optional.
That's right.
Okay? You will do these things. I love what the superintendent said. We are going to do these things by design because what has been being done by design.
That's right.
So we have to change the design.
That's right.
And if you can't get with the design change, go work in Cherry Creek.
All right, we have another
Cherry
question.
Creek's doing good work though. That's it. I got to do an event next week for this.
Let me just say though, I do think it's really important to name. It is I believe that leadership really does matter.
Yes.
And we have great leaders who don't know what they don't know. And when that is the case, when as an organization we see results like this, in some cases really good things, and then in some cases where it's like, okay, 20 extra days of learning for Black kids and 60 or 70 extra days for other kids, that means that organizationally, we have to be able to say, freedom, yes, and you don't know that this is yet part of freedom.
Right.
And we have to embrace those things. And one of the goals we have is to reduce a lot of the noise. I don't consider work on equity to be noise. It is the purpose of our school's existence.
Well said. Now, I'm particularly excited right now for the next question because I'm dying to know which of the 15 questions she submitted in advance she is going to ask. So I'm on the edge of my seat, please.
I'm Margaret Bob. I'm a retired teacher from DPS, 26 years, and this is what I do now is my unpaid job is just needle DPS to be the best they can be, because I grew up in DPS. Susana and I have talked a lot about this. I really am passionate. I have two. Can I ask, these are really actually questions.
You've earned it. Go.
I have two specific questions for Dr. Macke and one for Susana. For Dr. Macke, about the twins, when you talked about the data comparison, we compared twins in the district who look just like them. When you identified twins, was it just based on race, or how did you control for things like if you had two Black children in a charter and a TPS? How did you control for the fact that they were from the same socioeconomic group and that they maybe were from the same family structure who could facilitate transportation to their school of choice? Was that possible? Was that possible? And are pathway schools in your analysis considered TPS, traditional public schools, or innovation? Not sure where pathway fits into that category. And then Susana, I loved Dr. Macke's opening statement that this is the data. It's for us to have community conversations, to really speak with the communities of color and ask them what worked for you, what didn't, and when and how will those conversations actually happen? Because as we go into the school board election in November, I really fear that this is going to be used as some kind of talking point or soundbite about how great the status quo is, and we should just continue. And I think it's a little premature to do that without actually having those community conversations. So my question to you is, when will those conversations happen, and what's the plan?
All right, we're going to start with Macke, and then we'll go to the superintendent.
Okay. I'm happy to talk about the virtual twin methodology, but I want you to know that it's not used in this study. We did not do this. This is not a twin study.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
Good to know.
talk to me afterwards. I'd be happy to talk about twins. Pathways are included in the traditional public school district managed schools unless they are an innovation pathway school.
But there are pathways there are charter schools that are pathway schools on the
Charter
SPF.
schools.
So there's both.
But they would be counted under charter school.
Can I just clarify? So if it's a pathway school, we have charter pathways.
Yeah.
We have what this study calls traditional public school pathways, and we have innovation pathways. And I'm assuming that they are all grouped with either charter, innovation, or traditional public school.
Okay, cool.
Can I just interject here?
Okay, I got you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Suzanne.
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question. We hadn't yet undertaken any sort of approach to thinking about how to do this. I wasn't actually even sure like who all would turn out. I think it's a great suggestion, so we'll definitely take it under advisement so we can think about what the next steps would look like with this.
Okay, I'm going to get some new question askers. Go for it.
My name is Pratik Dutta. Thank you very much for the panel. Thank you. I don't regret this.
Talk just a little bit louder because I can't hear you.
I'll do my best. I only regret is about 20 years ago when I was in DPS, this didn't happen. But I'm glad to see this data. Now, if I was a cynic, which I'm not, but if I was, I would say, well, can't this be interpreted as the state of Colorado is not doing particularly well with African American special education or ELL students, and DPS is doing just barely average. And what would you respond to that if that is a cynical point of view? My second point is there anything you can share with us, Dr. Macke, about the other cities and what you've seen that Denver should be looking at? I'm sure you've seen a lot of ups and downs, maybe you see some early warning signs. Anything you'd like to share for us to be aware of?
So the first question is about the choice of the benchmark of the Colorado state average for the student subgroups. And the answer to that is if you look at NAEP at the state level, Colorado is not doing badly, even at the student subgroup level. They are right in the middle of the pack. They're doing about the nation's average. So I think in Colorado specifically, the choice of the state benchmark is actually pretty good because you're benchmarked essentially to the average of the nation, even at the student subgroup level.
Okay.
The second question, say that again?
I would just love your thoughts on
other cities.
Yes.
Cities, yeah. So I gotta be honest, this little spreadsheet, I got this on Saturday. Like we just finished the last city on Friday. And so I had enough opportunity to sit with these numbers and become one with these numbers. And I can tell you what the numbers specifically say, but I haven't gotten to the point where I have the insight about the nuances in these various cities. I will share from other work. I have two concerns about Denver. I hope that you can address both of them. One is the ability to improve and enhance the community engagement element of building your success going forward. And the second is I really worry about educator pipelines.
Yes. Yep.
Right? And you've had great luck in the pipeline department. You look at the teacher data and the principal data, you've had a really, really fortunate time. And I hope that that can be sustained. And for all of the things that we heard today, we have to have a much better embedded conversation. It has to be part of the DNA of the improvement work. That community is not just a voice, but a partner.
Hey, listen, I do not want to, we're getting tight on time. Listen, I want to give each panelist an opportunity for some closing remarks. And Charles, do you mind if I start at your end?
Yeah, again, I'm excited about the work that's taken place the last several years, and we're showing results. And I think it's, again, that tension of, we want to show improvement, but also highlight bright spots. And I hope from this conversation, there's more opportunities to highlight these bright spots, and then as a community, come together with solutions and think about how do we work together as a community to elevate all of Denver. And so I hope this is the beginning of many more conversations. And I know as a city, we're more than happy to be engaged and be a part of that discussion.
Thanks. Vernon.
Another historical reference, Dr. King from a letter from Birmingham jail. He talked about not being tranquilized by gradualism. And we have to make sure that we do not leave this room today tranquilized, but we actually leave this room today inspired to engage at deeper levels together because we are nowhere near where we need to be. Black children, brown children are still being failed. Those gaps are still something you don't want to talk to God about, right? Those are things that we need to really press our way to do differently and not be afraid of different, right? And better together, right? I know it's going to shake the system up when you got Brandon Pryor sitting there at the table talking about, I'm opening up an HBCU school, right? And the system's like, what, right? Sometimes the system needs to be shocked into doing it. I appreciate this superintendent, right? I appreciate her because she said something when she met with our pastors and said, look, this system will not change.
I was just going to say that.
Oh, wait, I'm taking it. Look, it resonated with me, though. It resonated with me.
Big systems don't change because they want to.
That's right.
They change with people on the inside and people on the outside,
That's right.
pressing them to change.
So press.
That's right. Well, that was what I was going to say. Big systems, and I just want to name. I am so fortunate to work for the Board of Education that I work for, and I want to acknowledge Dr. Carrie Olson, who is here in the audience from the board. This is really hard work, and one of the things that I never have to think about is our board behind it. They are all in on an equity agenda. And it is true, big systems don't change because they want to. They change with really hard work. The pull of the status quo can be overwhelming. And I need people, both inside and outside, constantly saying we can do better. I believe it deeply, and I think it's so important that we stay all in on that agenda.
Yes.
Macke, I'll give you the final word from the panel.
I think you heard it.
That's right. But we have to thank you also for conducting the independent data that brought us together today. Although much more to be done, let's take this conversations deeper into communities. And thank you all for coming today. Have a great day.